Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the rollout of free digital devices to school pupils.
Cabinet Secretary.
In order to maximise the impact of funding, we will provide support to a household level, targeting device investment at disadvantaged families with children. This approach will improve equity of access to devices and connectivity for those who need it most, helping families realise the broad range of benefits associated with digital inclusion and enabling access to digital tools and resources for learning. We are currently in the early stages of scheme design with Connecting Scotland, who will use their established model to distribute devices to eligible households.
Meghan Gallacher.
Presiding Officer, I'm afraid it's broken promise after broken promise, from failing to close the poverty-related attainment gap to the rollout of free school meals. Parents, teachers and pupils will now remember the SNP as the government who stole the weans IT. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, although I appreciate she was not in post at the time when they promised a free laptop to every school pupil, why did the government promise something that they knew they would never be able to deliver?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank the member for her question. I think worthwhile putting on the record, Presiding Officer, that the Government has invested £25 million in devices and connectivity. And that's resulted in over 72,000 devices and 14,000 connectivity packages being distributed to disadvantaged learners all over Scotland. However, I do find it quite remarkable that Ms Gallacher has come to the Chamber today to complain about the investment going to support digital connectivity across the country, given that, of course, it is her party that has cut this government's budget, particularly in relation to capital, by close to 10% in real terms. That is having a direct impact on the spending priorities of this government, meaning there is less funding to go into things like education. I hope the member would recognise some of the challenge in her question, and I think the hypocritical, if I may say so, Presiding Officer, approach she has taken today.
A number of supplementaries. I'll try to get them in. I've got more chance of getting them in if we don't have heckling of answers and indeed questions. First, Alistair Allen.
Thank you. Can the Cabinet Secretary say on a previous point whether the Scottish Government has made any assessment of the impact of budget cuts, capital cuts to Scotland from the UK Government on providing whether it's free digital services or other projects in the education portfolio?
As briefly as possible. Cabinet Secretary.
I thank the member for his question. Of course, I think, as I alluded to in my response to Ms Gallacher's question, this is particularly challenging at the current time because of cuts that have come from Westminster that are having a real impact. But not just on education, Presiding Officer, right across the Scottish Government. And it is particularly acute in relation to the capital funding, which, of course, Ms Gallacher asked me the original question on, which is due to contract by almost 10% in real terms over the next 5 years. This has real impacts here in Scotland, Presiding Officer, where, of course, we have one hand tied behind our back and we want to make spending decisions that affect the outcomes of our children and young people.
Willie Rennie.
The Education Secretary's predecessor, who's making a lot of noise this afternoon, made this solemn promise to the voters in 2021. He said these tools are no longer luxuries. So if they are essential, why has the government deprioritised this programme, and why are they now means testing the access to free laptops and devices?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank the member for his question. Again, as I have outlined, I think, in my response to both previous members, decisions taken by governments in other parts of the United Kingdom, governments that the people of this country didn't vote for, mean that this government in Scotland has less money to go around for a commitment that was now made some years ago. That is the reality of the UK. If Mr Rennie doesn't like it, then perhaps he should come to these benches and support Independence for Scotland and give us the real spending power we need to make investments in improving the capital provision that we currently have in relation to public services. That is the challenge of the United Kingdom and the status quo that Mr Rennie backs.